Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This is the type of video I don't like to make, but I wanted to put something together after hearing the news of the recent passing of a cinema history icon, someone who has advanced the cause of motion pictures being recognized as an art form far more than is really conceivable. Somebody who essentially themselves became a literal walking primary source almost due to his extensive interviews with many of the great legends who he was very lucky to have met and known and hit with millions of questions while they were still with us. I'm of course referring to Peter Bogdanovich, who just recently passed away, and it's quite sad because he is one of those voices that you just got so used to hearing or reading his works and his nonfiction works. Particularly the volumes Who the Devil Made It and Who the Hell's in It, which are two of the essential interview books on motion pictures. Those are essential reads. And of course, he was able to go to his reams of interviews and tapes of interviews, all the tons of interviews that he did with so many legends, because he literally sought them out when they were, in either in their later years or at the end of their careers in the 60s and 70s. And became, quite friendly with some, but also advanced, the causes of their work and the auteur theory and film in general being respected as an art form, starting in the days of writing monographs for museums and the Museum of Modern Art and putting film series and programs together, and eventually broke into directing feature films himself, starting in the realm of what is known as the Roger Corman Film School, and sort of breaking out onto the scene with his great feature Targets, which is just about the one of the last great Boris Karloff performances, but also going on to greater heights with The Last Picture Show, which is an undisputed classic, along with Paper Moon, and then a very interesting career that unfortunately is not very well respected on home video. Many of Bogdanovich's films are either not available or not available in a very good version, or simply just not around at all. So it is very difficult to see his later films and his other works. And so unfortunately, I don't have a great many to display as I go through this, but I'm just talking off the cuff here because I wanted to put something together, and this just recently happened. But I was just recently reviewing an old Bogdanovich commentary that had gotten ported over to a Warner Archive release. The commentary he did on the Fritz Lang film Fury from 1936, which is a masterpiece. I really have always enjoyed his commentaries as well, and he had such a particular style, and I must admit I always enjoyed when he would do his imitations of these legendary figures that he knew and interviewed and knew intimately in some cases, and his own personal takes on how they were as people. But it was made those tracks even more endearing, and YouTube is filled with Bogdanovich interviews, and he himself became just about the greatest reteller or teller of Hollywood anecdotes ever. But he did so much in terms of film scholarship that I think it outshadows even his directorial career, his career in actually making his own films. It's just as important as the films he directed, if not even more important, because once his career had gotten to a point where he was not getting job offers for features after the collapse of the New Hollywood movement and the sort of period of the late 70s, early 80s, when all of the notable directors had their flops, like Spielberg with 1941 and Scorsese with New York, New York. Bogdanovich had his. He had several, and he had many periods where he found it impossible to get directing gigs. And he did have several comeback periods, but he never gave up on the film scholarship side of things, which I think is just a testament to how much, he was devoted. His entire life was devoted to not just the art of motion pictures and the making of motion pictures, but also the history and the people who made them. And of course, he championed certain figures that he was very fond of, most particularly, which is why have some display pieces behind me, most particularly Hitchcock and John Ford. Of course, Bogdanovich made the great 1971 documentary directed by John Ford, which is wonderful to see because you see how Bogdanovich is trying to pull answers out of a very curmudgeonly John Ford. And you have to imagine how John Ford took to Bogdanovich's reams of questions, almost like the great SNL sketch with the when Will Ferrell would do James Lipton on Inside the Actors Studio with the mountain of blue index cards. But again, he was furthering the cause of these legends when it wasn't the in thing to do. It wasn't the in thing to talk about Hitchcock or write a monograph on Hitchcock in the early 60s before Truffaut published Hitchcock Truffaut, after Truffaut did the interviews and all the influence of the French New Wave, individuals being into Hitchcock and recognizing Hitchcock as an artist. And then, of course, the auteur theory eventually made it over to U.S. shores with Andrew Sarris promoting that. But Bogdanovich was all doing this all around the same time as well, and became a real notable figure of the emergence of film culture as a recognized thing. But of course, Bogdanovich was also a giant fan and admirer and supporter of Howard Hawks, and of course, most of all, Orson Welles. I mean, it goes without saying, to the point that not only did he become friends with Orson Welles and tried to help him get his final films made, and actually participated and acted in The Other Side of the Wind, and just recently in 2018 finally got The Other Side of the Wind to a completed version and released. It only took over 30 years to do, actually over 40 years, but he actually let Orson Welles room with him for an extended period of time in Bogdanovich's house. Eventually they did sort of have a falling out, but they always remained on some sort of terms with each other, and it resulted in what is probably the most important book that Bogdanovich was part of and is co-credited with, and that is the Essential Tome. This is Orson Welles. This is the closest thing you get to a Welles autobiography, and it's literally just done in the interview format that Bogdanovich was famous for. Just, reams and reams of questions and a full discourse style. But if you've never read this, it's a must read. It gets you really inside the inner the mental workings of how Orson Welles looked at things and how he approached not just films but art as well. Jonathan Rosenbaum did the editing for the book version. This is a later paperback printing, but this is such an essential work of just anything. I come back to this so frequently. It's been well thumbed through, and of course I've read pretty much every book Bogdanovich wrote. I've read in libraries. I've read dozens of times, particularly Who the Devil Made It and Who the Hell's in It. Those are, again, the two great interview books. But I know what, of course, I'll be doing, which is what most of us are going to be doing. We're all going to be spinning Peter Bogdanovich films and going back through all these great interviews. And what I found most touching and most interesting is he had just recently, about a year ago, done the Turner Classic Movies podcast. They started a podcast, and he was the subject of the first season, and it's a multi-episode thing, podcast. You can watch it on YouTube, actually, for free. If you haven't looked at it already, I highly encourage you to do so, because it really doesn't pull any punches. He is extremely candid and about his, not just his career, but his personal life, which was very turbulent and difficult and all over the place, and as a movie in and of itself, which is really no secret if you know anything about Bogdanovich. Again, his personal life was a movie itself. And of course, everything was directly tied to movies and motion pictures. And I know he wasn't in the greatest health when recording that, but that didn't stop him from just going full blast, and it's a multi-episode podcast, so it'll take you several hours to go through all the episodes, but it was so incredibly rewarding, and so I'm very pleased that he was able to do that, and sort of, I guess, maybe come full circle in a way before he passed away. So again, if you haven't looked at that TCM podcast, it's called The Plot Thickens. I'll put links to it in the description. It is a must listen, and it is not at all the typical, oh, I'm just going to retell anecdotes, or because it's Turner Classic Movies, you might think, oh, well, it's just going to be, a small little thing, and it's going to just hit the high points and gloss over stuff. No, it's not sugar-coated at all. It is very much like some of the great private screenings episodes from the great, golden years of early TCM. It is really extremely candid. It's basically like an audio autobiography. So I highly recommend that, and I will definitely be re-listening to that. It also made me realize again how many Bogdanovich films that I haven't seen in a long time, or ones that I've never actually gotten to see because of their just lack of availability. For example, Paper Moon finally got a Blu-ray release, which I haven't gotten yet because it's a Eureka Masters of Cinema disc. It has not come out in the US, so that makes no sense. That's really unfortunate, but I will be spinning the copy I do have, which is the old Signature Collection LD with the beautiful printed signature cover. I really loved this series. It's a shame they only did 2 or 3 discs like this, but it is nice Paper Moon got this treatment at least. And of course, I have the Criterion CAV box of his most famous film, The Last Picture Show. This is the big CAV Deluxe package that Criterion made in the Laserdisc era, and this is also the slightly extended cut that Bogdanovich made when it came to home video. So it's about, I think it's about 7 minutes longer or so, or maybe it's about 10 minutes. I can't remember the exact. Yeah, 7 minutes. Okay. And I'm pretty sure this is the version that has carried over to other releases, such as the Criterion Blu-ray, which is the current Blu-ray in print. And it was also included in the, of course, the BBS box set that he had. And then a film that is very much on the unobtainable side. This is also a Laserdisc exclusive in terms of the cut that's featured here. But this is the much later sequel, Texasville. So this is the Last Picture Show sequel. This is the director's cut that Bogdanovich put together, and it was only ever released on this Laserdisc. So it's about 20 to 30 minutes longer. I can't remember the exact additional runtime number, but it is significantly different to the release version. The theatrical cut got a DVD release, but that is out of print. This LD is the only way you can see the extended director's cut. Bogdanovich tried many times to get this released on DVD or Blu-ray. It never happened. Hopefully it can happen, at least now. It's a shame it couldn't happen during his lifetime, but this is the way you will want to see this film. I saw this on cable years and years ago, and I've had this LD for a while. I haven't watched it since I got it. I watched it when I got it and then just kind of forgot about it, unfortunately. But I've been meaning to rewatch it, so I will be looking at it again. And this is a much better film than its reputation would have you think. It doesn't really have much of a reputation because most people have forgotten it exists, but this is just a prime example of how Bogdanovich films are just not around. And then I've been wanting to rewatch his film Saint Jack with Ben Gazzara for a long time. That was a very limited Blu-ray release, and that is now, super out of print and very expensive. It seemed like it was in print for all of 5 minutes before it was gone. So I totally missed out on that one, and I'm trying to find at least a version to watch. It's unfortunate that most of his filmography is just non-existent. You can see the handful of more modern films that he did, and of course you can see the things that he appeared in as an actor. Most famously, most people are going to know of him now for his role as the psychologist in The Sopranos, which he was great on, and it was great to see him, back in the public eye, at least in that sense. But for me and for all film nerds and cinema fans, he was never out of the spotlight because, his published works, his film criticism, his importance as a storyteller of film anecdotes, and actually having known intimately a lot of the great luminaries and legends and doing the interviews we all wish we could have done. Of course, I would have been so nervous I would have been peeing my pants and I wouldn't have been able to get a word out. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to interview John Ford when Ford was not always in a mood to take questions from young film nerds. But Bogdanovich has always been a voice that I've just come back to over and over and over again. Whether it's been re-listening to a commentary or hearing one of his commentaries for the first time, or seeing him as a talking head in a documentary, or watching one of his documentaries, like he did the wonderful documentary on Buster Keaton just recently in 2018. Really wonderful to see, and also had his very warm perspective. It was always wonderful to hear on even his commentary tracks when you could tell it was a film he really loved. And I know it's not everybody's favorite commentary track, but I've always really liked his commentary track for Bringing Up Baby, which he constantly has to stop himself for just laughing at some of his favorite jokes and talking about it like an old friend, because it's one of his all-time favorite films that he's seen hundreds and thousands of times. And you never lost that in his prose and criticism, and that's something I always latched onto and really appreciated. And of course, his love of retelling the oral history of Hollywood and the anecdotes and the people, which is probably what he was best at and really unmatched in. Again, you can fall down the rabbit hole of Peter Bogdanovich interviews on YouTube alone, which I will try and link some of the really cool ones I've found over the years that are still floating around. Because when he would really get going, he could tell great anecdotes about Hitchcock or Hawks, or trying to get answers out of John Ford, or things he and Orson Welles would get up to. And of course, it's just absolutely fascinating. And he had a particular warmth in his voice and a particular dry wit, combined with a real impressionist tongue that I just always found irresistible. So again, for me, I've always appreciated him more as a film historian and a film scholar, even more than his work as a director, which is already extremely impressive. I do think it's a shame that he never was able to sustain the directing career he probably could have. But he had so many ups and downs. It's amazing that he was able to keep going. But again, he never gave up on movies, and he never gave up on film scholarship either. So it's going to be hard to get used to not encountering his voice anymore. And again, I was just literally, I listened to the TCM podcast when it came out last year, and I listened to every single darn episode, and each one was better than the one that came before it. And then I've gone back to some of the commentaries. Like I revisited the Bringing Up Baby commentary this year and his commentary for Fury. And now that I've got the Indicator Lady from Shanghai, I will be revisiting his commentary on Lady from Shanghai. And of course, now I'm going to be rereading many books and rereading This Is Orson Welles, especially. Bogdanovich is one of the important figures of film scholarship of the several generations. I still remember tuning in to TCM when he hosted The Essentials. Actually, I think he did more than one season of The Essentials, but I vividly remember that. And he had many great comments and selections on those. And I know there were some films that, because when I was much younger, it was some of the first time seeing some of those films for me. So that's always something I'll treasure. I do remember, if I remember correctly, he took over after Sidney Pollack did a season, and then I think that was around the time Sidney Pollack had passed away, and then Peter Bogdanovich came in and did the next year. So it was getting a great 1-2 punch of really great film minds doing seasons of The Essentials on TCM. But again, this is not anything specific. It's me totally rambling at this point. But I wanted to put something together because Bogdanovich's work, not just in directing and writing and acting, but also his work as a film scholar for many decades has really meant a lot to me and many cinephiles the world over. So this is a loss that will be felt by a great many fans and film fans everywhere. So that's why I wanted to at least say something and put it down in video form. But definitely take the time to check out the TCM, The Plot Thickens podcast. Take a look at Peter Bogdanovich's filmography and body of work. Try and seek out some of the films that are out of print or unavailable, or titles you haven't seen. If you can, see the director's cut of Texasville. It is a much better film. Unfortunately, it is a Laserdisc exclusive, so you'll have to have an LD player for that, unfortunately. And hopefully somebody will, or some label will decide and take it upon themselves to try and sort out some of the rights issues and things, or at least get some more of the Bogdanovich films out on Blu-ray. Again, I find it silly that Paper Moon has no U.S. release, so I don't know if that might be a Paramount Presents title coming down the road at some point. And of course, at least we have Last Picture Show from Criterion. But, it'd be great to get St. Jack in print again. So many other titles that could, definitely get a nice release. And, of course, getting the director's cut of Texasville would be really great because, again, that's something Bogdanovich tried to do. I guess on a very ironic note, at least he did get The Other Side of the Wind in some completed form out, because he always recounted that Orson Welles asked him, literally begged him. It's like, if something happens to me, make sure the movie gets out somehow. And, Bogdanovich was like, but Orson, nothing's going to happen to you. The movie's fine. And, of course, not knowing the multi-decade odyssey it would take to even get some version of the film out. So it coming out on Netflix and actually being completed and not being yanked before release and actually getting to public eyes finally, it was one of those unbelievable moments in modern film history, particularly for cinephiles. It's something none of us thought would ever happen. It nearly came to fruition many different times. Bogdanovich was thwarted, or just had the rug pulled out from him and other people in the process many different times. You can read about the tumultuous history of trying to get the film out and made in a completed version and released and not pulled and not dragged back into a court. So he managed to do that. So that's it. That's at least a wonderfully funny, ironic note, I guess, that he did manage to get The Other Side of the Wind out finally and keep his promise to Wells to actually get the film made and out. But I figured that was the perfect note to close on, to highlight that fact that at least The Other Side of the Wind is finally out. So, but again, please do take the time to dig into Bogdanovich's body of work. It is a fantastic canon, and again, his work in film scholarship and a gathering of interviews from primary sources is unparalleled, along with his great impression work and his great retelling of some of the all-time great Hollywood anecdotes. So just sad news that I had to comment on in some way, and his will be a voice that is certainly very, very missed in the cinematic community. I guess I should have worn a handkerchief around my neck to have the proper Bogdanovich look.